irrespective of where you live in the country, and recognise that this election is an exceptionally important one. It feels like the most important election in my lifetime. It will determine some hugely important things about the future of our country, and my generation and yours will be the ones who will feel those the most and live the longest to experience them. How do we leave the European Union? What is the future of the Union of the United Kingdom? You know, I want this election to end the deadlock, end the arguing that we've seen in the House of Commons.
But why no electoral reforms? Why no getting rid of the House of Lords? Why not changing the voting system? Is it because, dare I say it, it benefits you as a member of the party of government and one of the large two parties, the main two parties?
No, if your question is, am I content with our existing voting system, first past the post? Yes, I am. We had a referendum on this just a few years ago. The vast majority of people in the country voted to keep it. It's a simple system. It's one that enables you to have a named member of parliament in a constituency, someone that you can get to know, go and see, hold to account. And I think that's a good system.
OK, no changes.
It's a system that people all over the world respect,
you.
And I want to see that continue.
Jonathan,
but do use your vote, because this election is such an important
one. All right, Robert Jenrick, thank you.
It wasn't,
Jonathan
of course,
Barley.
a referendum on a proportional system, and that's a big red herring that's often thrown up. We've never had a vote in this country on a proportional system, and Katrina, if I understand your question correctly, that's what you're talking about. You want your vote to count. You want votes to match seats, and I think you're absolutely right. And if we've seen anything with the paralysis in Parliament over the last 3 years, it's that we've got a broken system. We need to be doing politics better. We need to learn to disagree well with one another. We need to collaborate more, as they do on the continent. Of course, we do need that fair, absolute fair voting system. But I think wider than that, the whole system
just on that point, do you think it's fair when you have got into an alliance with the Lib Dems, with Plaid Cymru, and people who want to vote Green in certain constituencies can't? There's been an alliance where you've effectively disenfranchised people.
People want to see more Green MPs in the House of Commons holding the feet to the fire of the other parties. And under a broken political system, we have to do this. We have big differences with the Liberal Democrats, as we do with other parties, but we're always willing to work with them in a more collaborative, grown-up way where there's common ground. And to get more MPs in Parliament, more Green MPs in Parliament, that's what we have to do. We got 2 million votes in the European elections. In 2015, we got 1 MP off over 1 million votes. That's not a fair system.
Katrin, is this answering... Is this answering a question? Do you feel like you have to play games with your vote?
Yeah, I feel like people are forced to vote tactically if they don't want someone to keep their seat. Whereas I feel like people should be able to vote for who they want to vote for, who shares their views. And that should be reflected.
So do you like the idea of alliances? Do you like the idea of parties coming together like this? Do you like the idea of, perhaps we'll get to it just now, of parties standing down huge swathes of candidates to help other parties?
Well, I feel like that wouldn't have to happen as much if we had proportional representation, because then people would be able to vote for who they want to, and it would be reflected.
And yet, Nigel Farage, you started this campaign saying you were going to stand candidates in every single seat. You bottled it, didn't you?
No, it's a political decision. I didn't want Jo Swinson to win lots of seats in the south and the southwest of England, which indeed she would have done, no question about that. So we got the Conservative Party dragged, kicking and screaming, into talking about something that nearly resembles Brexit.
Were you offered a peerage in exchange for that?
I am not for sale, unlike most people in politics.
But sorry, you did say... Hang on a minute. You did say in the Mirror... Excuse me a moment. You did say in the... Quoted to the Mirror newspaper and others, when asked if you'd been offered a peerage, Nigel Farage said, I was offered one on Friday. That was 3 days before you stood down those...
Repeatedly for us to stand down across the entire country.
By the Conservative Party.
And I would not countenance...
By the Conservative Party.
Yes. But this gets to the heart of the question, because it isn't just our voting system that's wrong. I'm with you. I think millions of people say, what the hell is the point of voting? I'm living in a safe seat. What it also leads to is parties saying, don't vote for them, they're awful, we're not quite as bad. I think a degree of proportionality would lead to us saying, look, this is what we stand for, please vote for us. And, you know, in the history of UK politics, I'm the person that achieved the most votes as a party leader for the Rees Reward. 4 million votes in 2015 and 1 seat in Parliament. So that needs reforming. But getting back to what Emma was talking about, the idea that the upper chamber, you know, the amending chamber that has legislative power in this country is filled with 600 people who were put there by Cameron and put there by Blair. We should abolish the House of Lords and make that elected too. Let's modernise our whole democratic system. It'll be a better, more positive...
Nigel, would you rule out here and now, would you rule out ever taking a seat in the House of Lords?
Yeah,
Would you
and I've done
absolutely rule
that,
out?
and I've done it
You'll
again.
never take one?
No, and I've done it again. I want the place abolished. I want real, genuine, radical...
Yeah, but you want to get out of the European Union, but you're still happy to go and take the salary as an MEP.
Well, if I wasn't doing it... Well, hang on. You know, your colleague next to you, they go to Westminster and take the salary. Plaid go to Westminster and take the salary. It's nothing unusual in being in a parliament you want to come out of.
Okay,
and you know what? I have been the turkey that has voted for Christmas year after year after year, and I'm very pleased with that.
Robert Jenrick, can we get just... We'll get some more questions in just a moment. Can I just get some clarity? Did the Conservative Party offer Nigel Farage a peerage like he is saying?
No,
so
absolutely.
are you accusing Nigel Farage of lying on the stage?
Well, I don't know what Nigel Farage is, where he's coming from on this.
What he's on?
But I know that the Conservative Party has not offered anyone in the Brexit Party any of these peerages and inducements that he loosely says.
You know, even Anne Widdecombe, you can like or dislike Anne Widdecombe, but when she says she was offered a job by your government, I think we all know she's telling the truth.
Sorry, just very briefly, who offered it to you? Single answer.
I'm not naming names.
OK, Angela Rayner.
But I may well do so to the Metropolitan Police when we get the inquiry.
Right.
Angela Rayner, could I come to you on this? In terms of the way people feel, a lot of people don't feel like it's worth it, perhaps, to go out and vote. Of course, the people in this room, I hope, are at least a bit into politics, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But in terms of Labour, we've heard it all before. This time in your manifesto, you say you're going to abolish the House of Lords, just one of the electoral reforms. When are you going to do it? If you get the keys to power, how long is it going to take?
Well, we'll put it in place as soon as we possibly can, but I'll tell you that our priority would be to deal with the poverty on our streets
Sorry,
at the moment.
when was that?
As soon as we possibly can.
But
we have to have
a time...
legislation through, and we do that, and we said that we would abolish the House of Lords, and we're absolutely clear on that. But our priority has to be to fix the 4 million children in poverty and everything else. So we will do it, but we'll also make sure we end tuition fees and do all the other promises that we've said, and we'll do it through our legislative programme. But one thing I would say...
It's just that parties, just to stick to this for a moment, rarely prioritise electoral reform. They get the keys, they run in, and they forget about the campaign.
We have a commitment to it, but I'm not going to say that we're going to do it on the first day, because our priority has to be to deal with the cuts that have happened. You know,
Angela,
the infrastructure.
You don't have a commitment to electoral reform. You have a commitment to it. Look at it in round in a...
The infrastructure of the UK is damaged, and we need to fix that. But one thing I would say that I think is really positive about this general election is more people have registered to vote, and young people are engaged. It's fantastic that we've got so many young people here tonight that are engaging in this question time. And whether you're in what's considered a safe seat or not, you can engage and change what happens in your local community, not just with a vote, but by being active and get your voice heard. Just like we found with the students with the broken promise by the Lib Dems on tuition fees, they will make their voices heard and they will make it count.
OK. Let's just bring in... Good evening. What would you like to say?
I think the problem we've got here, though, is that all these parties here, whilst they may say we want people to register to vote, aren't you so solely focused on Westminster when we're in an area of the country which is underrepresented? You know, we're in Yorkshire. Yorkshire's as big as Scotland, doesn't have devolution, doesn't have independence. Surely that should be at the forefront of the agenda, not being all about Westminster and serving your little Westminster village. Shouldn't it be about the greater area, the greater country?
Devolving of power, a good opportunity, perhaps a good opportunity to go to the SNP, Humza Yousaf.
Well, absolutely right. The gentleman has got it nail on the head. I mean, north of England is the most disenfranchised part of the United Kingdom. Look, I want Scotland to be independent. I'm not here to advocate for Yorkshire independence. I'll leave you to do that if you wish. But look, I absolutely see the benefit that Scotland has had, even with the limited powers of devolution that we have. So yes, of course, the people of Northern England, I think, have been the most disenfranchised. I just want to touch upon one or two things that were said by Katrina, and I think the question was exceptionally important. We're believers in a proportional system. In Scotland, we have a hybrid proportional system, which works well in the Scottish Parliament. It's designed not to have a majority. There's only been one majority in the history of devolution, and that's because we literally broke the system. But it's not designed for a majority, and it forces the SNP, who's the government at the moment, to work with other parties to find a compromise. So we definitely would support that. Also support, I should say, the abolition of the House of Lords. We've never taken a peerage, never ever will. But I want to say
and yet the abolition of the House of Lords never seems to happen.
Listen, vote SNP MPs in and we will support any party that looks to abolish the House of Lords.
You may not have all your voters here.
I promise you that.
Just finish that
one point. It's exceptionally important that voting is absolutely one way that you can take part in the democratic process. Can I say I'm really proud in the party to have somebody like Mhairi Black, the youngest ever MP in the House of Commons. Don't just use your vote. Get involved, get yourself elected and sit down in Westminster because you can make a difference too.
Jo Swinson, you've got involved from a very young age. Do you feel that you have let people down who can't vote for Lib Dems wherever they would like to? There may be people in this room who looked at their ballot paper and they cannot vote for your party because you're playing games.
Well, there's a huge amount at stake in this election, and I'm proud that we've worked with Plaid Cymru and with the Green Party to try to maximise the number of Remain MPs elected in this new Parliament. But I would love to have a system where that wasn't necessary, where catching your vote would count no matter where you were. It's important for people's votes to count. It's important because the very concept that there is a safe seat, that any politician does not get held to account, that will be voted in time after time, no matter what they do. That is fundamentally a broken part of our politics. And when you look at what is happening right now, you know, it sometimes feels like a slightly geeky thing to be interested in electoral reform, but actually it has a massive impact on the politics we get.
But sometimes you get coalitions, don't you? You've had that experience, and it didn't necessarily work out so great for the Lib Dems and their record.
And maybe it didn't, but I'm very proud of many of the reforms that we put in place, and we did try to abolish the House of Lords, and Labour refused to vote for it and to make sure that we had the time in Parliament to do it. So
you voted for the bedroom tax 9 times. Are you proud about that as well?
No, and I've said sorry for that, Humza.
Well, you can say sorry all you want. See if these guys made a mistake 9 times in their career.
And I'm answering Catherine's question on electoral reform. Right? And the reason that we are in this Brexit mess right now is you have a Conservative Party that is divided, that has been kicking out One Nation Conservatives, Churchill's grandson. You have a Labour Party that is divided. And the reason that those parties actually stay together, if we were in a country and elsewhere in Europe, those parties would not be single parties because the breadth of views is so wide. They would be different parties. People would have genuine choice and people would work together.
The B word. I have a feeling we'll be coming back to Brexit. Could I just take another question, please? Man on the front row here.
Yeah, I think we've got all the evidence that we are living in, frankly, a democratically corrupt country. I mean, we don't have proportional representation. We're living under an undemocratically elected House of Lords. We don't have devolution in the regions of England. We're living in the EU, which is fundamentally anti-democratic. And when we have a vote on direct democracy, we don't have the opportunity to do that ourselves, but when we're given the opportunity to vote on something in a referendum, 5 of the 7 of you don't even listen to us. So, you know...
Right. So, thank you very much. More hands going up. Lovely to see. I'm sorry. I really have to bring... Sorry, very patiently, Adam Price has been waiting there. What a fantastic opportunity to put your question to the leader of Plaid Cymru, who, as far as I can see from your manifesto, have ignored the will of Wales, who would like to leave the European Union, and you've told them they need another vote.
Well, no, look, I think the fundamental imperative, right, the first commandment in politics is to be honest. And when people ask me honestly whether I believe Brexit will hurt Wales or help Wales, I have to be honest. It will hurt Wales. You know, it'll rip the heart out of the economy in Wales. And that's what we sincerely believe. And I respect people, actually, that sincerely disagree with us. But I can't say something that I don't believe, even if it might be politically more convenient for me to do so. In terms of the broader question, I agree with you, right? And I agree with Catherine. There is a deep dysfunction at the heart of our democracy. Brexit, if you like, has brought it to the fore. It's thrown it into sharp relief, but it was already there. I mean, when I got elected to Westminster, in 2001, I couldn't believe what I saw, men in tights opening doors for you. It felt like a gentleman's club, and I use my words very advisedly. I say, instead of spending £5 billion on refurbishing, that crumbling pile on the banks of the Thames, shut it down, turn it into a museum. It's full of dinosaurs anyway. Move the Parliament. Move the Parliament to the north of England.
I don't know if you've noticed, but
to the north of England, and then maybe you'd see a different kind of politics, because it exists in a hermetically sealed bubble at the moment. It doesn't actually represent the people of any of the nations of this island.
Adam, thank you. I was going to add, I don't know if you've noticed, but MPs can't even agree on whether to move out or not, or restore it. So we'll look for agreement perhaps on other political issues. I'm going to take a few in turn now and get a few comments in. The lady on the front row. Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to say I think the dysfunction is also alongside Katrina's thoughts on the fact that we're not getting our votes heard, is the fact that we're not getting listened to either. Young people aren't getting listened to, and you're all not listening to each other either. I mean, the problem is that you can't work together. We don't work together as a community, and how do you expect a solution to come from that?
OK, we'll keep going. Just to the lady here with her hand up. We will come to you now. Thank you.
Hi, we're supposed to be a democratic union, but why are you trying to stop Brexit when there's 52% of the vote trying
OK, we'll definitely be coming into that in detail.
Mine was for Joe too. The people voted, so why is it you're saying people's vote matters, but why are you going completely against what people voted for?
OK, let's actually find now in the audience. Where's Michael Wigram? Hello. Please could you give us your question?
How can it be democratic to have a second referendum on EU membership for implementing the result of the first?
Right, it's come up. Angela Rayner for Labour. The question there from Michael, reiterated in other parts of the room. Let's just start very, very clearly. What percentage, because we've done a bit of maths here at Question Time, do you put it out that the shadow cabinet will support leaving the European Union with Jeremy Corbyn's deal?
Well, I've not had a straw poll myself of the shadow cabinet.
It's 94% will support Remain.
Well, I never took part in that poll.
All haven't declared.
Well, I haven't took part in that poll, so I don't know which of the shadow cabinet members
It's not a poll.
to,
We've gone through what you've all said in public.
Okay.
And we're trying to figure out, is Labour the party of Remain or Labour the party of Leave? Your leader has said you'll be neutral. How will you vote,
He said he'd be an honest broker in it.
Yes.
And one of the things that
How will you vote?
One of the things that I found very frustrating is that people think that we're trying to stop Brexit. That's not what we tried to do. We've not been in government. We've tried to work with government. They put their red lines from the start, which we've been pragmatic and said we'd have to have close alignment with Europe. We'd have to have a customs union and a singles market. We've said that because unless we do that, our trade with Europe and the Northern Ireland border will still be an issue. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. People feel that they were lied to, slogans on a bus and everything else. Now, I don't personally subscribe to people didn't know what they were voting for. I think people did, and I understand people's frustration. But we've said that we would have a close alignment with Europe, we'd get a Brexit deal and we'd put it back to the people within 6 months.
And how will you vote personally? You're here with voters who've turned out this
I'd like to see what the deal is that we get. But if we get a deal that protects our economy and jobs, then I would vote for Brexit because that's what people wanted and I represent my constituency. But it has
so we've
to
just
be
taken
a deal,
the total to 3.
But it has to be a deal that doesn't put jobs and the economy at risk in my constituency. That is my red line.
Robert Jenrick, we're only in the position that Michael has outlined here, where even the idea of a second referendum has gained traction because of the chaos and mess the Conservative government has made for 3.5 years of failing to execute a referendum the Conservatives called.
No, more than just the Conservatives. 90% or so of MPs at the time voted to hold a referendum. I was one of them. Angela, I think, was one of them as well. We voted for it, and we gave the question to the people to vote in the referendum. As it happens, I voted Remain, but the majority of people in the country voted to leave. And I've always felt that it is absolutely essential, if we're going to respect our democracy, that we carry out the wishes of the public in that vote. And going back to Katrina's question earlier, why does one's vote not count? Well, this was an opportunity for every person's vote to count in the country, and now we're suddenly told, actually, your vote didn't count. You know, Jo is saying that she's now, she was in favour of revoking Article 50 altogether. Then she said she wants a second referendum, but she would ignore the result of the second referendum as well. What we want to do is get Brexit done, and then move on with the life of the country.
Robert. Could you take now, in front of 18 to 30-year-old voters, some responsibility as the Conservative government for creating chaos and mess of executing a plan that you instigated. Could you take some responsibility without throwing it to the left or the right?
Look, I wish that we had managed to get Brexit done a long time ago. I voted on every opportunity to get a deal done, a good deal, get out of the European Union in March of this year. We weren't able to do that.
Is that a yes?
Parliament voted against it time and again.
Parliament, it passed it. It passed that deal.
No, that was later in the year.
You didn't want the amendment.
Parliament voted for it. And then
but you had a deal.
15 minutes later, Parliament voted against getting it done.
No, you wanted a programme motion within 2 weeks where we couldn't debate the motion,
which is fed
not
up
usual
with
process.
the arguing in the House of Commons. I'm fed up with it. It's virtually the only House of Commons I've known
Do you take any
in the very little time that
Very
I've been
quick,
there.
sharp, yes or no. Do you take any responsibility?
No, this Parliament.
No. No.
At every
Okay,
turn,
it's no.
Parliament
It's no.
has blocked Brexit.
Your answer is no.
We now want to move forward.
Okay.
The good news is, Emma,
Can we get
have
to
a
our
deal.
audience?
It's ready to go. If only we can get a majority Conservative government,
Robert
Brexit can be done.
Robert Jenrick.
by
Should we
the
hear
end
from
of
the
January.
audience? Shall we hear from the audience? Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I've got to completely disagree with what you said, Angela, because I'm from a constituency which voted to leave, but our MP, a Labour MP, has voted to remain every single time, every single opportunity she's had.
Yeah, part of the problem with the deal that we've got at the moment, which was Theresa May's deal, which Boris Johnson couldn't even agree on. He didn't vote for it. His deal now is 95% of Theresa May's deal. It's not a good deal for us. We haven't had the opportunity to, like I said, honestly, that we have to have close alignment with Europe. We haven't had that opportunity to put that deal forward. The deal that the Conservatives have put forward is a withdrawal agreement, which means years of still trying to negotiate the future relationship. It hasn't dealt with the Northern Ireland border. So most Labour MPs actually have said, we can't vote for that deal. That doesn't mean to say we don't respect the result. It's just that I can't vote for a deal that is really bad for my area.
Okay,
what the
Joe, I'm going to bring you
position
in. I'm going to bring you in just a moment. Let me take a few comments from the floor. Let's take a couple here. First at the back there.
Just one for Angela. You've said your deal would include single market and the customs union and would protect jobs and services. Is there any way in which it varies from Remain?
Okay, let's hold that thought. We'll come back. Yes, sir.
Just to say, as a Scottish person, my voice hasn't been heard on Brexit. Scotland voted no to it, yet we're still getting dragged through.
Okay.
That's not democracy.
Another one here. Thank you.
Is it not Parliament's job to challenge the government and to prevent the government simply sweeping things through?
As the role of Parliament there. OK. Joe Swinson, in terms of the original question, and then obviously feel free on any of those, Michael asked, how can it be democratic to have a second referendum on EU membership before implementing the results of the first? Oh, you just wish to ignore the whole thing and revoke it, don't you?
Well, I want to stop Brexit. I'm not going to apologise for that because remaining in the EU is better for our jobs, for future opportunities, for our public services, for our environment.
How do you know? We've not Brexited yet.
Well, I know because we'll be losing crucial environmental protections that the Tories will then want to rip up because all of the economic analysis shows that when you pull up massive barriers with your closest trading partners, that will hit business.
And to the question, is it anti-democratic? You're the only one here which says revoke Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, look, in a democratic event, right? So it's giving people the choice.
But then you'll ignore the result.
Election. No,
you said that you'd ignore the result.
No,
and
I
campaign
didn't.
Against.
No, hang on. There's a difference. There's a difference, Robert, between saying that you're not going to change your beliefs, because I'm not going to change my beliefs. I'm pro-European. I think it is better when we work with our closest neighbours, and I'm not going to change my beliefs.
What's the point in having a second referendum if you'll always ignore the result?
It's different. No,
What's the point in it?
I'm sorry, you're saying I'll ignore the results, which is just not true. I'd answered a question, will I suddenly change my belief? And no, I won't, right? And, when I first got elected to Parliament, the Labour Party had a majority. I didn't suddenly go, well, I'm going to stop arguing for Liberal Democrat policies and just agree with Labour and everything.
You'd respect the outcome of the referendum. After the referendum, you said you would, and then you changed your mind.
Okay.
And started campaigning against it.
Joe, final point from you.
I just don't think people
Robert,
can trust you if you're continually changing
Robert,
your
thank you very much for that. Joe,
I just want to point out that Angela has sat there and told us the most amazing amount of fudge. Because the gentleman at the back said, look, what is the difference between customs union, single market and Remain? Well, a key difference is that we would be having the single market regulations, but we would lose our voice on them. And the basic bottom line is there isn't a Brexit deal that protects jobs, that is good for our economy. And the people that are trying to say that that is the case are trying to peddle something that is simply not true. And then people wonder why there's a problem with trust in politics.
We argued this in the referendum. I think we'll be better off. You think we'll be worse off. What we think is irrelevant. The country voted, and your party, I remember the late Paddy Ashdown saying, we will respect the voters and we will implement the result, and you have broken your word. You've broken your word.
Don't you
Very
talk
simple.
about what people said during the referendum.
Broken your word.
All of the lies about Turkey being about to
You've
join
told
the
us
EU.
lies for 50
You
years.
stood in front of that breaking point poster to
You've
stop
told us
racism
lies.
and division. I will take
European
no
army.
lectures from you
You've
about your
lied for
behaviour in the
50 years
referendum.
about this.
When you both,
all the way through.
when you both talk at the exact same time, it is
Graceful.
rather hard to hear. Nigel Farage, just a question to you on this. Is the Brexit Party, if the Tories get a majority on Friday morning, is the Brexit Party going to die on its sword because Brexit's on its way, it's oven ready, to use the Prime Minister's phrase?
If the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party pass the new EU treaty as it currently is, unamended, we'll be back in crisis within 6 months, because it is not Brexit. It doesn't free us from the institutions. If the Prime Minister is wise enough, if he wins, to make some amendments to it, then maybe we're talking. I mean, what we've got here, we've got 5 parties that have broken their promise. They promised during the referendum and after it they'd respect the result. Now they want people to vote again because they don't like the result, and they're re-rehearsing the arguments. What the Conservatives have done with Mrs May's deal and now with Boris's deal is
which you hated.
They're giving us...
You went out and said you hated, and then you stood down more than half of your candidates and disenfranchised
because
people.
Boris said he would negotiate a Canada-style deal, and I thought that was going to be your campaign. I heard him on Friday night talking about it being oven-ready. Either way, we must not have a second referendum in this country. It would be disastrous, and the main reason I stood those candidates down was to stop the Liberal Democrats in the south and southwest of England. If we don't implement the result of the referendum, leave the single market, leave the customs union, then trust in democracy in this country will never be the same.
All right. I think the reason...
OK, Angela, just 1 minute. Just 1 minute.
Can I just say why I think...
No. Could we just get in these 2 women here, please, first?
You say that we have voted on this issue, but some of us here have not voted on this issue. How can you justify giving my grandparents 2 votes on the matter of the EU whilst I myself, who is going to be affected by this, has not had one?
Well, it should have been implemented a long time ago is the answer to that, but it wasn't, sadly.
And just another one here.
I also, additionally adding to that, is 16-year-olds should also get the vote because they're going to be lasting with it a lot longer than any of you will. And secondly, I think there should be a second referendum, not for Remain or to leave, but because our elected representatives are unable, even though we have elected you as experts, to come up with a deal that everyone is happy with.
I think...
Adam, let's just bring in Adam at this point for Plaid Cymru. Adam Price.
To quote David Davis, who's just as much a Brexiteer as you, Nigel Farage, you know, in a democracy, the people, you know, are entitled to change their mind.
When you've implemented the first one, yes.
Well, no, look,
you've got to implement the result, and then they can decide again.
I remember you on the day of the, before the result was coming out, when you thought he was going to go the other way, you said that you wouldn't have changed your mind. You'd have continued the next day and the next day afterwards.
There would never have been a second referendum. Ever.
You would have still have campaigned.
The establishment.
You would still have campaigned.
There would have been no point.
When you talk at the exact same time, trouble to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
Please
this
carry
is what
on.
Brexit has done to our politics. It's about to do the same to our economy as well.
Well, then respect the result and implement it then.
I think there was a fatal flaw at the heart of the Brexit referendum, and that is the responsibility of the Conservative Party. Right? They put forward a proposition in a referendum, and they had no plan. There was no plan behind it, and that's why we're going now. I think Brexit could have happened, and to go to the point that you were making earlier, if politicians were prepared to compromise, right? We're a passionate Remain party, right? But we actually voted in favour of a soft Brexit, right? But what happened was, and I think that would have reflected the narrowness of the result. So you find a compromise, okay, it's Brexit, but it should be a soft Brexit because it was a narrow result. Instead of, what happened is, the Conservative government took it ever further towards an extreme hard Brexit.
Sorry,
it was impossible to find the compromise.
What evidence do you... What evidence?
Adam,
hello, over here.
Okay.
Hello.
Let's just agree to disagree respectfully.
Adam, I hate to break up the Adam and Nigel party, but Adam, what evidence? Excuse me. What evidence do you have that the people have miraculously changed their mind, especially in Wales, where, to remind you, Brexit trumped. It won.
The only evidence that we have are the opinion polls which show a shift. But the only way to test it, ultimately, of course, is to have that confirmatory referendum. And I agree with you, because politicians have failed to do their job, we have to take it back to the people, because it's only the people now that can end the impasse.
Let's bring it to our people then. Yes, please.
Well, I just want to know if Nigel Farage is going to be voting Conservative, because that's the only way to get Brexit done. And I think that the only reason he opposes the government's deal is because he likes being on TV and he doesn't want to lose.
Oh, let me assure you, I don't need to sit here to be on TV, all right? Look, I wanted to believe Boris.
You could be on Fox News, I suppose, yeah.
Well, there we are. Exactly. I wanted to believe Boris when he said they were going to go for a Canada-style trade deal.
Have you got one of your candidates in your constituency?
No.
So who are you going to vote for?
I'm going to spoil my ballot paper, because when Boris said, we'll go for a Canada-style deal, I liked it.
That's a really good example,
He's now saying, no, I think you should vote. And spoiling your ballot paper is a form of voting. I would never stay at home.
You can't stomach voting for the Conservatives.
No.
The only party that you've said is going to deliver Brexit.
Because
if the leader of the Brexit Party can't support Brexit, what is the point of the leader of the Brexit Party?
Because it's not Brexit. I repeat the point. If Boris, when he said on the Friday night debate, Boris said he'd pass the oven-ready deal by Christmas. If he does that, that is not Brexit. We will have years more wrangling, a crisis before next summer. And this is the Conservatives, who, of course, over half the cabinet voted Remain. They never, ever wanted the Leave result to win. And they're still 3.5 years on, not giving us what we deserve.
But Nigel, you're making the case for why we need to put this issue back to the public, because it's this unicorn Brexit. So you're saying you can't agree with Theresa May's Brexit and then not even Boris Johnson's Brexit, and that if it was a customs union single market Brexit, that wouldn't be Brexit. I mean, the Brexiteers can't...
to leave.
But hang on, the Brexiteers can't even agree among themselves what Brexit looks like. That's why the specific Brexit deal needs to go back to the people, because there's no confidence whatsoever that there is a majority in the public for any specific Brexit.
Very quickly.
We did not vote to leave the EU treaties to sign up to a new EU treaty. That is what the Conservatives...
People might have
that is what the Conservatives
I tell you what, let's put it back to the people. We'll keep using the phraseology. Back corner here, in terms of questions. And please do say your question.
So everyone keeps saying that we voted Brexit and we should just move on and we had a referendum. By that same logic, why do we have a general election every 5 years? It's because people change their minds, and it's been 3.5 years. I didn't get to vote in the referendum. I think the whole electorate has changed. Surely it's the only democratic outcome to put the vote back to the people and have a second referendum.
OK, and we're going to take another one here. Thank you very much, on the back row.
Why we're not talking about Cambridge Analytica in all this involvement of the result that came from the 2016 election. Vote Leave and Dominic Cummings conspired with Cambridge Analytica to swing the result. And it only won by 4%, so...
OK, another
point there. All the Russian report that's been suppressed that people haven't seen yet,
OK, I'm sorry.
All the Russian report that Jeremy Corbyn read out to us the other day.
OK. I know... Nigel Farage. Excuse me. Hello. Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage. I know...
You're the one leaking Russian documents.
Hello. I know that you have a radio show, but this isn't your show.
I know.
Jonathan, please could I bring you in at this point?
There's a theme that I'm picking up from some of the questions that came from over here and over there as well about trust in politics and then trust in the democratic process. And the idea that we just drive this through somehow is going to heal our country. It's not. People in my family voted Leave. I play in a band. Half the band is split, 2 and 2, with Leave and Remain. The idea that suddenly it's all miraculously going to be done and dusted if we just go with some kind of deal. It's not. We need a process for moving through this. And with Cambridge Analytica, the Russian interference, we still don't know about that. We need a better system of democracy. And for me, more democracy is not anti-democratic.
OK, well, just to say on that, Cambridge Analytica did work for Vote Leave, just having checked that. But can I ask you about this? We were talking about alliances before. The Green position is for a people's vote, not to revoke Article 50, which is why Caroline Lucas, your only MP, you're hoping to boost numbers, now a candidate, of course, she described the Lib Dem policy you've got into bed with the Lib Dems for this election as arrogant, cynical and self-indulgent. How can you stomach sacrificing potential Green votes when you are doing something with your own Brexit policy you don't agree with?
I think she also dropped the F-bomb in that phrase.
She did, but it's pre-watershed. It's watershed, and I'm not going to do that.
Look, we're the least tribal party. Where there's common ground, we're always going to work with other parties to try and find a way forward. We believe we need a better form of politics. And of course we don't agree with the Lib Dems on loads of things. We stood up proudly against austerity in 2015 when even Labour compromised. We've unequivocally stood up for migrants and refugees when the other parties have compromised. And that horrible rhetoric that came out in the referendum, that scaremongering, and Nigel, you standing in front of that breaking point poster was the lowest point in my life in politics.
No, the truth can be horrible, can't it?
That wasn't the truth, though, Nigel. That wasn't the truth. Are you going to apologise? That wasn't the truth.
I can't apologise for the truth.
That wasn't the truth, Nigel.
I know you
They were not refugees. You know
that. No, you're right. You're right. Thank you. They were not refugees. Thank you. The Labour Party.
You were trying to dog whistle racism, and you're a disgrace. You're a disgrace. You're a disgrace for dog whistling racism. Apologise for it. Apologise.
Thank you for saying.
Stop peddling hate.
Thank you so much.
Stop peddling hate in our country.
Thank you so much.
You say you won't apologise,
amidst your bile and prejudice, you've made the point. You've made the point.
Channel 4
they were
have
not
highlighted
refugees.
what a racist party you are and what you've been doing and what you've been saying in the north of England.
The Labour Party is saying other parties have got a racism problem.
You have got a racism problem.
You want to wake up and smell the coffee.
You have got a racism problem.
Well, you've got an anti-Semitism problem. You're being investigated by the authorities.
We deal with it.
You haven't dealt with any of it.
We don't go around.
Okay, thank you.
You have lowered British politics. You have lowered British politics.
Thank you very much.
Your leader has tolerated extremism in the Labour Party.
Thank you very much. Okay, Nigel Farage, Angela Rayner, Joe Swinson. Let's hear from someone we haven't heard on this particular point here. Let's go to the SNP. I hope to go to Humza Yousaf, because what's interesting about the SNP here is you pick and choose which referendums you like to hold and which referendums you respect the vote of, which you want to do again. And by our calculations, if we're following all of the things that your leader has said, there'll be not one, but two referendums next year.
Yes.
Is that really what you think the British people want to go through again?
I'm telling you, it's what the Scottish people want. And Michael, to answer your question, and I think the gentleman in the same row as you, look, Scotland voted overwhelmingly to stay within the European Union. 62%, not a small margin, a pretty hefty margin. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. We're going to get dragged out. Now, out of all the nations in this so-called partnership of equals, Scotland is frankly the only one that is getting shafted. England voted to leave, you're going to leave. Wales voted to leave, they're going to leave. Northern Ireland voted to remain, they get a differentiated deal. Scotland votes to stay, and we are going to get dragged out. That is completely anti-democratic.
Sorry.
And let me just hold on, Emma. I want to address the point that the lady made in the second row here on the right. Because not only should 16-year-olds get to vote, as they did in the Scottish independence referendum, but what a disgrace that EU citizens weren't allowed to vote in the EU referendum. What an absolute disgrace. The people it was going to affect the most didn't get the chance to vote. And let me just say this about the parties.
Sorry, could I just ask you that? How long do you believe the results of a referendum should last?
If there is a material change in circumstances, then of course you should be able to ask the question again. Look, this is probably Emma.
Hang on a minute. What if the UK doesn't leave? You lose. What if under Jeremy Corbyn's government, which you may or may not have to support come Friday, what if Angela Rayner and the whole shadow cabinet team negotiate a new deal, and what if the British people as a whole vote to remain? You cannot have a Scottish independence referendum
With the greatest of respect, Emma, it's not for you or anybody in Westminster, or indeed not from Scotland, to decide. It's for the Scottish people to decide if they want another
you've lost your material difference.
No, actually, the Brexit issue is just symptomatic of a broken Westminster system. We've had 10 years of Conservative Lib Dem austerity we did not vote for. A bedroom tax, a benefits cap, a rate clause, all of which Scotland did not vote for. Are you surprised, any of you, looking at the Westminster system over the last few years, is it any surprise that Scotland looks at that shambles and goes, you know what, thanks, but no thanks?
OK, thank you very much. Let's get some more comments here. We'll just get a couple. Yes, please, the gentleman in the blazer.
Hi, it's a question for Joe. You say that you're the party of Remain and you want a second referendum, but we're not going to have a second referendum as a result of your actions before the election. The SNP, the Lib Dems, Labour, the Remain alliance, you had the Tories pinned down, you had them, you could have added amendments to the deal that they brought in, and you could have forced through a second referendum. Now, we're having this election which is made up of multiple issues. It convolutes everything, and people are voting for different reasons, not just on Brexit. But if you'd have held your nerve, you could have forced through that second referendum. Instead, you went for an election because you want to be the gamekeepers in a situation where there's a...
I want to stop Brexit. I'm going to come straight back to you on that, but just let's take another point from the woman here.
Brexit is going to make Scottish independence more likely at the end of the day, because the Scots are fed up. And I completely understand why you're fed up. But at the end of the day, we are a united kingdom and we have to stick together through thick and thin. And Brexit is the thick part.
I'm not sure we have to. Oh, genuinely, and I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I get why you're saying it. But actually, if you had a chance to get on a lifeboat out of a sinking ship, I think you would take it.
Well, hang on a minute.
Even the IFS and your own reports have said you would be worse off if you went for a second referendum. Only Labour will be able to stop the austerity that we've had for 9 years under the Tories and the Lib Dems, and that's what we'll do.
It's because of you that we have a crash. It's because of you we have an economic crash.
OK. I mean, we're really feeling the festive spirit here in the question time room.
I agree with the young woman at the front who says that we're better to stick together through thick and thin. That's what I think that we should do. But to specifically answer the question from the young man behind, look, I'd much have preferred us to be having a people's vote on the specific Brexit deal than a general election. Liberal Democrats tabled amendments to try and secure a people's vote 17 times, and the Labour Party, instead of backing those amendments, 19 Labour MPs voted for Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. That's why we're having an election. Because if we hadn't done that, he was going to get his Brexit deal passed on the back of Labour votes.
They would have added amendments to the vote and it would have changed the deal entirely, and it would have eventually... someone would have had to have folded, but you guys folded first.
Just a few weeks ago, we tabled an amendment for a people's vote. Labour didn't back it, right? So actions speak louder.
An election was your only option.
Actions do speak louder. You don't want to respect the result of the referendum. That's pretty obvious, and you should be honest about that.
I think, to be fair, Angela, I am being perfectly honest about wanting to stop Brexit.
9 years today, you did the tuition fees. You was honest then as well, I'm sure.
You can say that you like Angela about various things in the past, but I don't
think... poll tax, like the austerity, like the tuition fees,
I was 10 years old during the poll tax, Angela. I don't really think I can take responsibility for that.
The bedroom tax, though, you can.
But you can't...
The bedroom tax.
And you can't...
and austerity.
But you can't accuse me of not being honest about where we stand on Brexit.
Sorry, excuse me a moment. Just to say, I think it's also important to remember that when austerity was brought in by the coalition, Alistair Darling, the Chancellor of Labour, had said that he was planning similar policies.
It's what got me involved in politics, Emma, because I didn't like where we were. And look where the Labour Party is now. We are completely different. We are anti-austerity as a party, and I'm proud to be part of that shadow cabinet that will end austerity and invest in our older people and our younger people today.
All right, let's talk about this.
The problem is you think people have short memories. It's the reason why you're going to get an absolute kicking in Scotland is because you are the architects of austerity.
No, we wasn't.
Alistair Darling said your cuts wouldn't be similar. You're wrong. He didn't say they'd be similar to the Tories. He said they would be deeper than the cuts made by Margaret Thatcher. And for that alone, you should apologise.
If you look at our manifesto and you look at where the Labour Party is now compared to where it was, we're in a better place. We will end austerity. We will invest in our communities again. We will end tuition fees. We will give kids the education they deserve. And we'll stop older people dying on trolleys, not getting the support that they need at the moment. That's what Labour's promising now.
Right, we are. Sorry, Adam. I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry, but I would like us to move on.
Apologised. Tuition fees. It's just important to point out tuition fees was a Labour policy. Yeah, so have you apologised for it as well?
And it wasn't triple. And we didn't triple tuition fees. There were 1,000 under Labour. And you also got rid of maintenance allowance. Maintenance
now I know how John Bercow
feels. For students.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's move on. We have a question from Aidan Booth. Aidan, where are you? Hello.
How can politicians claim that they're serious about climate change when they won't deal with one of the biggest contributors in meat consumption?
Meat consumption. Who should we talk to first about this? Nigel Farage, do you eat meat?
I certainly do, yes. Actually, when it comes to a lot of grazing animals, sheep, for example, well-kept pastures, believe it or not, absorb carbon dioxide. So some of the arguments around meat are actually, I think, slightly false arguments. There are, I know, arguments about methane. Perhaps we won't go there right now. But just to think that all meat farming is a disaster in terms of CO2 is actually factually wrong. I would just say this about climate change, and you know, you've come to me first on this. I mean, this will be a competition around...
Do you believe in it?
I believe the climate's warming now, just as it was cooling 40, 50 years ago. But is it warming? Yes. Is that something we've got to think about seriously? Yes. But let's just bear this in mind.
You said in September 2013 the science wasn't settled. Have you updated your
Science is never settled. Science is never settled. No science is ever settled. To say that it would be absolutely crazy. These debates go on and on and on. Of course they do. The experts thought in 1974, the same experts thought we were going to have global cooling because of man's influence. So science is never settled. But just bear this in mind. We as a country are emitting less than 2% of global carbon dioxide. China last year emitted more CO2 than America, the whole of Europe and Japan. Now, we keep talking about cutting CO2 emissions. Only 3% of what governments spend around the world.
That wasn't the question, right? And let's bring the mind back to the question here, because really, Aidan, if I may, do you feel any of that's answered your question? Because actually what you're talking about is personal responsibility and governments talking about that.
It's easy to put it on China or USA or wherever.
But it's a fact.
Yeah, no, they have it as well, but we could also cut down what it's not.
OK, so let's keep going with this personal point. If I come to you now, Robert Jenrick for the Conservatives, do you think personal sacrifices are necessary? Could you see a day where governments said to people, you can only eat a certain amount of meat?
I don't think that's likely. I think we've got to bring people with us on this journey. Public attitudes have changed enormously in the last 10 years, but it's important to keep people with us. We're making massive changes as a society. You know, we've decarbonised
What do you do?
as a country. Well, in lots of different things I do. No, I mean, there are many things I do. I've made efforts to make my home more energy efficient. I've used less plastics. Well, I've done more insulation at home. I do try and drive less, use more public transport. I think we're all trying to do... These are small things, admittedly, but we're all trying to do more in our daily lives. And in politics, as a government, we've done a huge amount. We are decarbonising faster than any of the other major countries in the world. We've legislated now for net zero by 2050. I know some people would like to go further than that, but that was a huge step forward.
But these are about personal... But you say you've got to take people with you. These are about personal things that people can do, which do contribute to Aidan's point and add up. You say no state intervention. Let's move to the party of big state.
I haven't said no.
You said
I said no state intervention. I'm not going to ban people eating meat, but we are doing other things. We're investing £1 billion in electric car charge points, for example, to encourage more people to buy an electric car if they can. We're investing more in buses and in railways to help people to use public transport. In our manifesto, we're giving £9 billion to help more energy efficiency, starting with schools and hospitals and the homes of people who are more vulnerable, like
schools got the money to give the books and the teachers, so the 9 million or billion that you're suggesting that you're giving to schools, actually, they can't even stay open at the moment.
You're opposed,
they can't even stay
opposed to trying to cut the energy bills of schools?
No, I think that you need to be
the Labour Party are trying to do something similar.
You need to be absolutely clear that the funding that you're suggesting you're putting is nowhere near even the amount you've taken out of schools, and will just about reverse some of the cuts, but 83% of cuts will still happen in schools. That's before you even think about carbon neutral. That's your money that you put into schools, which is nowhere near enough.
We're putting more money into schools and raising standards at the same time. But it is important that we tackle energy efficiency. The Committee on Climate Change has said this is one of the key tasks.
I mean, Robert, you literally abolished the Department for Climate Change. You sold off the Green Investment Bank and you stopped onshore wind. It is true.
The record speaks for itself. Well, why are we doing better than almost any other major developed country?
Is what Joe Swinson said the case?
No, it isn't
well,
true.
Sorry, you didn't sell off the Green Investment Bank. You did. You didn't stop onshore wind. You did. You didn't abolish the Department for Climate Change. You did.
Let him reply.
Joe, the Green Investment Bank is succeeding in the private sector. If you don't think there's a role for the private sector in meeting our climate change obligations, then you've gone the same loony direction as the Labour Party.
There is,
we need tens of billions of pounds of private investment to meet our climate change obligations. £92 billion of private investment has gone already into renewables.
Robert, can I take offence with your language?
More.
Just don't call us a loony party, because that's offensive language, actually. I don't appreciate it. I don't appreciate it.
You want to...
We're supposed to have a political debate.
Robert,
you want to put off the private sector from investing. And that's not going to work if you want to tackle climate change. Because we need people to be investing and businesses to be innovating to meet our obligations.
Hello. Angela, as the party of big state, you're talking about your first 100 days today. What would you say in direct response to Aidan, he's put his hand back up, I will come back to you, about stopping people from eating meat? Talking about the actual question here.
We have to encourage people to make good choices for our climate and our environment, first of all, at an individual level. And actually, my young kids are much more aware of that than what my generation were. And we have to get real, because climate emergency is a real problem. Climate change is a problem, despite what Nigel thinks. But there's
Would you nationalise sausages?
No.
Would you have a whole meat policy that you would say to people as the party of big state? Would you say to them, please try and limit the amount that you eat to a certain gram a month?
We would give people the information for them to make healthy choices, and actually all of us have to take responsibility for our actions in that. But if we're giving people an informed choice, then that helps them make those choices. But in terms of state, and we come back to that, and Nigel's point around China and everything else, if we create 1 million green jobs and we create solar and wind farm and the technologies around that, we can export that. And that's the industrial revolution, the 1 million green jobs we want to create.
Factories all over the country.
We won't close down factories. We will rebuild new factories, Nigel, and we will redistribute dealing with the climate emergency.
The industrial base will disappear.
It's not true.
And it's happening in the north already.
The industrial base, no, that was happening under Thatcher when you were in that party. That was happening under Thatcher when you were in the Tory party.
Well, you're good at being offensive, aren't you? You complain about him, and yet you're offensive to everybody.
Why do you not? I thought you liked Margaret Thatcher.
The fact is...
I thought you liked Margaret Thatcher.
We will close down every chemical factory, every heavy engineering plant. We've got to think about this. We cannot unilaterally go to reduce carbon ahead of everybody else without losing a huge number of jobs.
Well, I'm going to bring in other people who haven't spoken, but let's take a few more questions. The gentleman here on the front row.
Yeah, in terms of China, the poor environmental record of countries such as China and India doesn't necessarily excuse the United Kingdom. Especially in a post-Brexit world, the UK shouldn't hold back. We should be a flag bearer for important issues such as the environment. We shouldn't just hide and isolate.
Let's just take one more here on the back row, please.
Speaking of cuts, as a newly called barrister, I'm concerned about the increasing cuts to legal aid. And do you agree that the most vulnerable in society have been denied access to justice? And will you support young legal aid lawyers through pledges to bring legal aid back to social welfare law, ordinary people, and to ensure that young legal aid lawyers are remunerated fairly for the vital work that they do?
OK, a couple of points there. Let's just take that question directly to Robert there, Robert Jenrick, as a former lawyer yourself, the decimation of legal aid.
Well, I do appreciate how difficult it can be, particularly when you're starting out in your career at the bar, if you're doing legal aid work, if you're doing criminal work. I know it's very difficult, and there is actually, as a result of that, some people are not going into the profession. We do actually spend more money as a country on legal aid than almost any comparable country, more than France and Germany and other major countries. So there is a very significant budget of billions of pounds for legal aid. But we have said that we're going to be spending more on the criminal justice system, particularly on prisons and those parts of the system that I think do need now some investment. these were not easy choices. You know, they were choices born out of a very difficult circumstance that we came in 2010 when Labour had crashed the economy, the debt and the deficit.
A global economic crisis
the choice
by
is
banks, not the Labour Party, unless you're saying that we controlled the world.
The choices that the last Labour government made, just like all the previous ones.
So you say you wouldn't have nationalised the banks? Just, let's be honest, would you not have nationalised the banks?
The Labour Party
No, come on, be honest. Would you have
left the
nationalised the
public
banks?
finances in
Was
a
it a
terrible...
global economic crisis?
Sorry, there was a question, and if we could respect that.
With respect, I did.
We know that Boris Johnson's distanced himself from austerity, despite being, of course, a cabinet member that signed off on austerity. But in terms of your commitment now the spending taps are back on, to this question, are you going to reinstate funding that has been lost to legal aid?
We've said that we will be spending more on the criminal justice system, and that is as a result of 9 years of economic growth, of the very high levels of employment we have in this country, the highest levels of employment since records
and
began.
Food banks and
as a result
poverty.
of that, as a result of a strong economy, we are now able to invest more in our public services.
So is that a yes?
That will be in the criminal justice system, it will be in
Is it
police,
specifically legal
where
aid?
we're going to be... well, the criminal justice more broadly, we will certainly be investing more money.
So
We'll
no
also
commitment
be
to
doing
legal
it
aid
through
at the moment?
20,000 extra police officers, for example, plus the extra investments in the health service and education. But disregard it as you will, it is important.
I wasn't disregarding. I just
it's
wanted
important
to
to
have
make the
clarity
point
for the question.
that we can only afford to do this as a country if we have a strong economy. If we risk that by having an old-fashioned, far-left Labour government, there will be less money to fund all forms of public services, particularly services like the criminal justice
Can we bring
system.
in, back to our original point here. So there's a question there about legal aid, but the original question, if we can get back to it, I just won't lose it there, from Aidan, which was about meat consumption. If I could just bring this to you, Jonathan Bartley, as the co-leader of the Greens, it would be slightly remiss if perhaps we didn't talk to you about this. Some have said, while these sorts of ideas are laudable, that being ethical in all sorts of ways, whether that's through the food that you eat, the planning that perhaps that takes, is a richer person's game. It is not that affordable. For instance, we looked at the difference between shampoos that don't have palm oil versus soaps that are more ethical in that respect, and there's a great price difference. What about the criticism that being green in your personal life can cost a lot more?
Sure. So can I draw also the austerity point together? Because the two are, for me, two sides of the same coin. When I was born 40-something years ago...
48, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
You look younger than me. What's your secret?
We were told that we're going to create all this wealth, have this technological breakthrough, we're going to get off our dependence on oil. Well, look, the economy is now 3 times as big. We've got 3 times as much wealth. We've had the technological revolution. We know how to harness the power of the sun, the wind, the tides. But instead of getting that kind of utopian vision of working fewer hours, spending more time with our family, having a cleaner air to breathe, we've seen rampant inequality. We've seen climate destruction and breakdown. And now we're on the verge of a mental health epidemic, stressed out, working longer hours than ever before. We can solve the climate emergency and not just stop austerity, but reverse austerity if we are willing to make the right choices. And as far as I can see, we're the only ones that are saying we can have a hopeful vision where we can cut people's bills by super insulating their homes. We can get people out of their cars by cutting public transport fares.
You're going to have to borrow a heck of a lot of money to do that, aren't you?
And we're talking about something like Roosevelt's New Deal, like the Marshall Plan. And frankly, if the climate were a bank, we would have bailed it out by now. Yeah. When there's an existential threat on your doorstep, you pull out all the stops, as we saw in the financial crisis. And this Green New Deal that we're putting forward, not a narrow green industrial revolution, but a Green New Deal that covers agriculture, meat, transport, energy, every sector of the economy. We put this forward at the time of the financial crisis. We should have done it 10, 12 years ago. And if we had, we wouldn't be in this fix with austerity and we wouldn't be facing the same environmental destruction on our doorstep.
OK, in terms of your position of getting arrested with Extinction Rebellion recently, wasting police time, the Extinction Rebellion protests have also cost millions to the police. Any regrets about that? At times when you say resources are stretched?
Not at all, because we are putting forward the solution, and it's got to be a political solution. We can invest more in the police. The money is there if we have the political will to do it. We know that austerity was a lie. It didn't have to happen. People have suffered needlessly. And when you've got Extinction Rebellion protesters on the streets pointing the finger at politicians and saying, you have put our lives at risk, you are playing fast and loose with our future, you didn't take that step 12 years ago that you should have. This is our last means of resort. I'm very proud to put my body on the line and stand in solidarity with them.
Adam, let's come to you.
Well, you know, look, Jonathan's absolutely right. Look, the level, the scale of the ecological and climate emergency we're facing is the biggest challenge that human civilization has ever faced. You know, politicians often collapse into hyperbole, but everything that I've just said is true. I mean, we are facing the extinction of 1 million species on this planet. That's 1 in 7 of all the species on this planet. And so you're absolutely right to call out each and every one of us to rise to that challenge. There's a positive here, right, as well. We're on a wet and windy island, actually, which has huge potential resources in terms of marine energy. If we had the leadership that we deserve, you know, negative interest rates, right? There's never been a better time to borrow, to invest in creating the green infrastructure, the platform for the future, not only to address the environmental catastrophe that we will face if we don't change course, but also the economic dividend, because the whole world is asking the same question. How do we decarbonize? If we actually build the future faster and first, we will reap an economic dividend, because we will create the innovation that will solve the world's problems, and that will create an economic opportunity for Wales, Scotland, England, and Ireland too.
Jo Swinson.
So, I mean, I think there's, you know, 2 things that need to happen. We all need to take personal responsibility, and that's everything from our recycling to how we use packaging to the economic decisions that we make of how we spend our own money, and indeed what we think about in terms of, you know, where our food is coming from. Is it sustainable? Is it, you know, well sourced? Is it local? But ultimately, this can't just be something that rests on each individual person. The government has a job to do to make sure that it is easier to make the decision that is the sensible decision. You know, so if you want to go and buy an electric car and do your bit in that way at the moment, you'll find it is incredibly expensive. And the way to resolve that is to have government regulate so that car manufacturers have to bring forward the date at which they are not allowed to sell new diesel or petrol cars. And this is important for the climate in terms of global warming. But it's also important right now, and I want to tell you about Ella. She should have been studying for her GCSEs right now, but she's not. Because when she was 7, she was diagnosed with asthma, and when she was 9, she died. She died of polluted air because the air she was breathing was impacting her lungs because of the poison that we are emitting. And she's not the only person. 40,000 people a year die in our country because of dirty air. So if we get this right, it is not only that we are going to make sure we hand on to the next generation a planet that can thrive, we're going to improve people's health right now. This is urgent. This is now. It cannot wait.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
First of all, I mean, I was laughing at, I mean, so much to laugh at Nigel's response, but I mean, the fact that he said the science wasn't settled. I mean, science literally is there to settle.
Never been settled.
It's empirical data. Nigel, it's empirical data. You can't argue.
All right. Could we just hear your take?
But the point I would make to Aidan is, look, in Scotland, and there's a young man here who also mentioned this point, that we should be at the forefront. We should be global leaders. Yes, we know China emits and pollutes more. We know India pollute more. But I would like Scotland as an independent nation, but of course, while we're still part of the UK, to be leading the way, and we're doing that. Our targets actually for net zero are 5 years ahead of the UK. We're 2045. Our 75% target at 2030 goes far beyond what experts say is needed. But let me also just make this point to all of you as young people, that I'm exceptionally proud of the role that you've played in bringing this to the agenda, at the front of the agenda, right to the top of all the politicians sitting here, because I know the Conservative government ticked you off and chided those young people for skipping school and how dare you, and it was terrible. I was really proud to be part of a Scottish government that said, you know what, bloody well done, because you brought the issue right up the agenda, exactly where it needs to be. So well done for that.
Thank you very much on that issue. We're now going to do something a little different and take a question that's been submitted outside of where we are. This has come from on Twitter. It's straight and to the point, and I think everyone here would really appreciate it if our politicians were quick and straight to the point. So not looking for a single word, but very quick answers if you can. It comes from Julian, who got in touch using the hashtag. What will you do to bring trust back into politics? Please answer without negatively referencing the opposition. Adam.
We'll table a bill at Parliament to make lying by politicians a criminal offence.
Nigel Farage.
Reform our political system, bring back faith that we vote for things that are representative. We haven't got postal fraud ballots, and we do not have a House of Lords filled up with the friends of current Prime Ministers.
Angela Rayner.
I won't lie, and I'll call out the people that do.
Robert Jenrick.
We'll deliver on the outcome of the referendum in 2016. Leave the EU by the end of January.
What, like October?
Jo Swinson.
I'm going to stick to my principles of wanting to remain in the EU, whether it's popular, whether it's not.
Humza Yousaf.
Very hard not to reference negatively some of the other politicians, but I will do my best and say that we will fulfil the promises and the mandates of the manifesto we stood on. And I quite like the idea of Adam's bill, which I might have a look at after too.
Jonathan Bartley.
Yeah, I like Adam's bill too. Yeah, we would lift the ceiling on the fines that can be issued by the Electoral Commission, so parties can really get hit hard when they're caught out.
Right, thank you to Julian for that. And thank you for answering those briefly and without being negative for a moment. Just a clarification. Dominic Cummings, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister, has denied allegations of links between himself, Vote Leave and Cambridge Analytica, just to bring you that. Let's go now to another question from Maria Bell. Maria.
How can we be sure any future houses are genuinely affordable when private companies are expected to build the majority?
Robert Jenrick, if I come to you, the Conservatives pledged to build 200,000 starter homes in 2015, but none have been completed.
Well, you're absolutely right. The previous administration chose not to proceed with that policy. Instead, they spent that public money on building more affordable homes. And we've built 450,000 affordable homes in this country since 2010. That's more on average per year than the Labour government did before us from 1997 to 2010. We've built, in the last year, more homes in this country than any year bar one in the last 30 years. There's a role for the state in that. We're now investing £9 billion in an additional 240,000 affordable homes, but we're also trying to encourage, through reforms of the planning system and infrastructure, the private sector as well, because you need the two to be working together to deliver the number of homes that we need to in this country. We think we need to be building about 300,000 homes every year. We believe we're on course to achieve that, but you've got to have a very vibrant private sector and additional government resources.
So that mix together. Could we just do an experiment? Could we have a show of hands? Put your hands down for a moment and then we'll come straight back to the questions. How many of you here own your own property? Okay. How many on the panel own their own property?
Well, I've got a mortgage.
Yeah. Yes, but you own it. You have a mortgage, you own your own property. Okay, so there's a disparity there. Could I just do a quick whip round? Maybe I could start a whip round like I'm going to collect to buy a house here. Adam, could I ask all of you, how old were you when you first purchased a property? How old were you, Adam?
30.
Nigel?
22.
Angela?
I think I was in my late 20s.
Late 20s. Robert?
25.
Joe?
26.
Humza?
27.
Jonathan?
26, I think.
Okay. So there you go. That's it from our panel. In terms of where we are then, you were just explaining what you hope to do in the future, Robert Jenrick. You are, of course, Secretary of State for Housing. You're very proud of being a millennial, the first millennial in the cabinet, I believe, to hold that position, a millennial MP. Do you think you're relatable. When you became an MP, it was... it was reported, we have a young audience here, genuinely asking the question, it was reported that you owned 3 homes when you were aged 32. Just to understand the relatability there.
Worth 5 million.
Well, look, I'm not going to apologise.
It's not about the worth, it's about the number. I was just trying to understand.
I'm not going to apologise for having had a career before I went into politics. And it's a funny question from you, Emma, if I may, because I'm certainly not going to apologise for having a successful wife who has a career, earns money, and enables us to buy nice houses. So look, but the thing in politics is, what do you actually do when you're there? And I've made it my personal mission as Housing Secretary to help more young people and people on lower incomes onto the housing ladder. We're doing a number of things in our manifesto. One is to say...
Let's just hear about this manifesto for a moment. I'll come to yours.
One is to say that we're going to offer a 30% discount to local first-time buyers to get a property in your own area. Another is to say that we're going to help you with your deposit, which is the biggest challenge for most young people. And we're going to say that we're going to create a market for 95% mortgages, so you need a relatively small deposit, and then we're going to have fixed low interest rates for the lifetime of that mortgage. Through serious, good interventions like that, I genuinely believe we can make owning a home an aspiration that you can actually achieve in life, and that's what the Conservative government will be trying to do if we're re-elected.
Jo Swinson, talking there about deposits, you actually want to lend people their deposits for rent, is that right?
No, the rent-to-own policy is...
Tell us more. Is that changing the system?
Yeah, it is changing the system. It's about saying that, I mean, there's lots of different things that need to be done. So there does need to be much more social housing built, as well as more housing built overall, because the fundamental problem, you know, I mean, the contrast between those of us who are a bit older on the panel and the audience is that just demonstrates how much more difficult it is now for young people to buy a property than it was 15 years ago. And obviously not everybody will be in that situation of being able to buy a property, but what we have now is lots of young people who would be able to afford the monthly mortgage repayments, but wouldn't be able to have a deposit. And so the scheme that we have is basically a rent-to-own scheme. So you would pay your usual rent, but over time that actually builds up equity within the home, and at the end of 30 years, you would own it outright.
So that's one solution you're proposing. Angela Rayner, 150,000 social and council homes built per year, with 100,000 built by councils. Coming back to the question here about future homes being affordable and private companies are expected to build the majority. Paul Johnson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies said of your plan, do we really have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of construction workers lying idle at the moment who would be able next week or next year or even in a couple of years to start doing this? I think the answer is almost certainly no. Is this just another promise that seems unrealistic from the Labour Party?
Absolutely not, and there isn't people lying idle at the moment. There's a lot of people not being given the skills, and that's why I'll create a national education service, and we can put people online to have those construction jobs for the future. And I make no apologies for 100,000 council homes that we need, or the making sure that the contracts for tenancy is a minimum of 3 years, and that we'd have rent controls in line with inflation.
So you think you can do that next year?
I think we can start putting that online straight away. Yes, we can.
Sorry, what does that mean?
It means that you can't build 100,000 houses tomorrow on Friday, but we can certainly start to create the national education so people can get free education.
How many houses are you building in Wales where you're in government?
To get those jobs. And how can you talk about houses you built?
You built 50. You built 57. You built 57 council houses in Wales last year.
You've just said
the year before that you built 0. The year before that you built 0. The year before that you also built 0.
Angela, listen. Excuse me.
9 years
Angela,
you've been in government.
Now you're just having a
built more homes than the last Labour government.
Angela, please continue with what you were saying. She did listen to your point.
I did listen to your point, that's right. So we will create those jobs and those skills so that we can get those people into construction. But the other difference as well is that we'll make brownfield sites available. Instead of allowing the planning law so that our green belt is taken, we'll create community housing again and council housing where people can live with parks, with recreational centres and with genuinely council housing. This idea of affordable housing, I'm not quite sure who's affording them, but most people cannot afford to live at the moment and are in private rented accommodation that's way too high, and they're spending too much of their wages on it, and it's a rip-off.
Adam, if we... Adam Price, if we come to you, the situation from your perspective is what? Because perhaps, maybe there's a rethink. Maybe we should be moving away from home ownership.
It certainly is true that we're not building enough social housing, council houses for rent. I mean, the average of the last 20 years of the Labour government is 15 a year, you know. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. So we've got to do something about that.
You're talking about Labour in Wales, there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 15 a year, ridiculous, you know. So 20,000 is what we need, and we need to continue at that rate over the course of the next 15 years. And it's absolutely right. There's this issue about affordable homes and help to buy. I mean, the average price of many of these, even in Wales, but by the way, is 150,000, some of them, 200,000. You know, and these are not affordable by any kind of stretch of the imagination. So we're putting the resources in the wrong area. We need to do something on social housing. In the meantime, we've got to do something about generation rent. Those who are renting in the private sector, we've got to bring back rent control. We've got to have the end to no-fault evictions. We've got to have open-ended tenancies. Those are all things that are in the Labour manifesto in the Westminster election, but you could do them now.
Let's get that in Westminster, and then we can get it across.
The point is this, Angela.
The funding that's in there to help.
The point is this, Angela. You're in power. You're in government in Wales now. You could do all of those. You could do all of those
austerity passed on by the Tory government.
This has nothing to do with austerity. These are laws that you could pass where you are in power now, and you're not doing it.
Nigel Farage, to bring you in, going through the Brexit Party contract, there's no numbers there about housing.
No, I mean, the big problem is numbers. And I'm afraid this generation are paying the price for a population explosion. 8 million more people living in the country than there were when Tony Blair came to power. We've not been able to plan for public services or housing because we just didn't know how many people would come. I do think the argument about affordable housing being built, at the moment, frankly, that is not going to happen. Because I do.
Is that why you've not even promised a single house to be built?
No. What I do think we need to do, is we've got to provide more council housing and more social housing. But to restore people's trust, I think it has to be done by local councils, and it must be for local people.
Let's just take a few comments there. Thank you for that. Yes, this lady here with the denim jacket.
Point of the housing thing, reading the Conservative manifesto, I was very, very shocked and quite appalled to hear your plans to do with gypsies and travellers and the removals of a lot of the rights in terms of removing their homes from both private and public land. We already have 400,000 people at the moment either living in temporary accommodation or street homeless or just unregistered homeless, living on sofas and things like that. Where, you know, if you want to eradicate gypsies and travellers by the sounds of it, where are you actually planning on putting those people? Put your feelings to one side. Actually, where are you going to put them? That's what I'd like to know.
OK, we'll come back to that in just a moment.
As far as I see it, that's ethnic cleansing, and it is. And it's the last acceptable racism, and you pull it out before every single general election because you know that it will be appealing to Middle England, and I've had enough of it. So what's the answer?
OK, so there's the question. Come back to that in just a moment. Let's just take this gentleman here. Keen to get a few more voices before the end of the programme.
I just want to know if the panel think that it would be a good idea to get rid of things such as buy-to-let schemes, which just drive up the prices of housing.
OK, clear question there. And we'll just take from the back row, please.
Just want to stand up on a point that Robert made about the stuff that the government is doing, help to buy ISAs. That's how I got my house. So...
You can't. Some people saying they can't get it anymore. That's how you got onto the property ladder there, sir. OK, very clear question, and then I'll bring in Humza here as well as Jonathan. But a clear question, Robert, if you could answer it briefly. We have very little time left about the point there made by the lady. Excuse me.
Well, I appreciate the lady's question, but she's not correct. Of course, we're not going to compromise the human rights of anyone in this country. We do believe that the planning system should apply equally to everyone, and there are instances where travellers have done illegal encampments in people's communities, and we want to give somewhat stronger powers to the police and to local authorities to move on those travellers. And I think that's completely understandable.
To move because them to where? Where are you moving them to?
You don't
even have houses for anyone else.
Either wherever they wish to go or to permanent sites. So we're going to give more powers to create more permanent sites. But we don't think it's right that we have a planning system which is unequal and that some people have special rights within it, and we're going to change that.
And what about
just to answer the point that the gentleman also said, absolutely right, we've also helped 250,000 young people onto the housing ladder through Help to Buy. That's continuing for the next few years. And we've also cut stamp duty, remember, so that unless you buy a very expensive property, £300,000, you won't pay any stamp duty as a first-time buyer.
Robert, there's 135 children this Christmas that will be homeless on sofas in temporary accommodation. That is a scourge on 9 years of your government.
Well, that's why we need to build... No.
Absolutely.
Angela, that's why we need...
Talk about right to buy and everything else,
that's why we need to build
more... You've not created the council housing and the social housing that we need in this country.
With respect, more council houses were built in this country last year than in 13 years of the last Labour government.
We are building
kept to your 240,000 homes now every year.
Children.
That's the way to resolve this, not by making,
135,000 children.
Cheap political points.
That's not a cheap political point for those kids.
To get houses built in this country of all types, from ones by the private sector to council properties, so that more people can get a safe and secure home.
Robert, thank you. Thank you, Angela. Jonathan.
So in answer to the question about the buy-to-let, housing has become a speculative commodity, and we've forgotten that it should be about people's homes. And we would introduce rent controls, absolutely. We would also build 100,000 council homes a year. We've got 4.5 million economically inactive people, so I want to support Angela's point about we can get the workforce. But also we'd introduce a land value tax, which I think is the most radical proposal for bringing that land back into use. We desperately need that greater supply of land. We've got a lot of developers sitting around just waiting for the land to increase in value, benefiting from the infrastructure that we put in around it, that we all pay for through our tax money. And then they just cash it in maybe in 5 or 10 years. And that land is lying empty. So a land value tax would abolish council tax and business rates and replace it with a land value tax to move the shift onto the land owners to increase the supply of land. And I think all the other parties are going to be talking about this in 3 or 4 years, where Greens lead, others follow, but it's the future.
Let's just bring in Humza at this point. The original question about future houses being genuinely affordable when private companies are expected to build the majority, the disparity, of course, between the audience here and the panel in terms of home ownership.
Yeah, well, I'm going to come to that absolute specific point in just a sec, but I thought the lady in the second row here on my left, hit the nail on the head. It is always a few days before an election that the dog whistlers in chief, and you have the dog whistler in chief on this panel here, Nigel Farage, blame everything on immigrants. In fact, Nigel, I'm not lying to you, I'm not making this up, but Nigel was once late to a UKIP reception and he blamed the traffic on the M4 on immigrants. That's how ludicrous it is that he blames every social ill on the world.
Do you not accept that population growth of 8 million has made our roads busier?
I will accept this,
Do you not
that
accept
immigrants have contributed much more to this society than they have ever taken. Everybody under the sun. I know you don't like facts, but you know what? Migrants have made this society better.
I'm giving you a fact.
In academia,
people,
in business,
more in the country,
and in our cuisine. And thank God for it.
Population.
So actually,
hang on. Just hold that point, Humza. Hold that point. 4 of you speaking at the same time. We have a talented audience and talented viewers. They can't hear.
On the specific question of the housing. So I'm pleased in the Scottish Government we have responsibility for housing. We have built 87,000 affordable homes, the vast majority on social rent, and we're on target to meet our 50,000 home target by 2021. But one of the best things that we did was abolish the right to buy when it came to council houses. Because when the Conservatives sold off council houses, when Labour sold off council houses, you want to know how many they replaced? They replaced 1 in 5.
Why is your deficit? Why is the deficit at 7%?
That has nothing to do with housing, but the deficit is to do with 7%.
It's to do with your fiscal capabilities. You wish to be a member of the European Union, separate to England, separate to Wales. You want to be independent. You can't even join the European Union because you have to be at 3%.
Well, actually,
the reality is...
So you're wrong on 2 counts. So first of all, having a 7% deficit while we're part of the United Kingdom is hardly a great advert for staying within the United Kingdom. We're not independent. If we had the full powers of economic fiscal levers, of course we can make a difference. Hold on, I didn't interrupt you. The second point is incredibly important as well. Actually, you're wrong about that being a barrier to join the EU. Croatia, Poland, Hungary all had a deficit higher than 3% and joined the European Union. Please, I absolutely respect that on this panel and in this audience, there will be differences of opinion on independence. But please do not patronise Scottish people by saying that you are far too poor. Every other Northern European country can be independent, can be prosperous.
Next to you.
But somehow Scots are going to be too poor to be independent. That is not the case.
I think it's really important that there's an honesty about this.
Honesty?
Yeah, look, seriously, Humza, right? You're standing there advocating independence. Emma asks a perfectly reasonable question, which is that the Scottish deficit is 7%, and across the UK it's 1%, right? So there's an obvious question is what would happen in an independent Scotland? There's a perfectly reasonable point of view that says, I want Scotland to be independent and recognise that there would be a big hit to the economy and that we would be poorer. But what you're trying to say is that somehow there'd be magic tools that you would do something differently.
Final thought. We literally have a minute. Final thought.
I don't say that, by the way. When it comes to independence, I'm not for a minute saying that there's going to be rivers of milk and honey falling from the sky and it's going to be all perfectly rosy. No. What I am saying is we have a plan to reduce that deficit.
Okay.
No, listen to me. This is very important.
Well, I can't
that plan would include, for example, increasing our spending in line with real terms, but not as high as the rate of GDP.
Humza, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much here. Our time is up. The last question time before we go to the polls in 3 days' time. We will be back on air the day after the election. That's Friday the 13th. From Wandsworth in London, that's live on BBC One at 8:30 with Fiona Bruce. Call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience, or go to the Question Time website and follow the instructions. But for now, thank you so very much to my panel, to the audience here for coming tonight, and of course to you at home for listening and watching. From here in York, to all of you, thank you so much. Good night.